Hey everybody, today's topic is Stranger Things, the Upside Down. I was thinking about rounding off the previous chapter section that we spoke about, that weakness is strength and strength is weakness. It's flipped. And I wanted to continue with this topic a little bit further and dive a little bit deeper into the upside down concept that the Course talks about. Basically, Jesus tells us that our view of ourselves and others is literally upside down. I'm not sure if you know, I'm pretty sure you are. You know this, right? Stranger Things. Hit TV series on Netflix, and I'm a huge sci-fi fantasy fan, so this was right up my alley. And in episode 4, season 1, when one of the characters explains the upside down, it kind of blew my mind a little bit just to see it on TV, and the obvious connection with the Course, with that concept, and I was very excited about it. So basically, the upside down in Stranger Things is our world in a parallel universe kind of a thing. So it's our world, but completely uninhabitable, dark. Everything is rotting, and mold spores are floating around in the air. It's very eerie. Everything is dead. Some of the characters in the show get lost in it, and it's very, very hard to get out of it. But everybody that watches the show, right, naturally believes that in the story, the upside down world is the dark world, and our world is the world of light, is the real world. The Course, however, provides a significantly different point of view on that, and Jesus certainly doesn't think that our world is the world of light, right? He mentions that many, many times. From his perspective, the world we live in is the world of darkness. The world we live in is the upside down. The Course says, for example, the world is a dry and dusty, or he talks about a dry and dusty world where starved and thirsty creatures come to die. That's what he thinks of our world. We will be discussing this topic in 2 parts. One is the world at large, and one is, that's a smaller part, is kind of ourselves, our immediate surroundings, and our thoughts and feelings more internally rather than the world at large. There's really no difference, but it kind of makes sense to have a little bit of a separation between the two. So let's start with the world at large, the world we see every day. This is a world of opposites, right? There's light and there's dark. There's good and there's evil. There's happiness and there's sadness. There's beauty, and then there's ugliness. And last but not least, there's life and there's death, right? And for us here in this world, those are the opposites. However, as we have discussed in previous segments, everything in this world, because it comes from the ego thought system, and the ego thought system is the opposite of heaven, everything in this world must be the opposite of heaven. So, for example, darkness and light in this world, even though we see it as opposites, are both opposites of heaven. Not from the perspective of heaven, because from the perspective of heaven, nothing else exists. But for us, that we believe in the duality, That means we believe there's darkness and then there's light, but both are the opposite sides of the same coin, are an opposite to heaven. The same is with beauty and ugliness. Beauty in the world and ugliness in the world are opposite sides of the very same coin. Both of them are an opposite to heaven, or made to be an opposite to heaven, right? Sadness and happiness, same opposite side of the same coin. So is life and death, right? Life and death are both the opposite of life in heaven. We have a need to see the world a certain way because we need the world to be a certain way, right? We need it so that we can deposit our sin in order to get rid of our guilt, right? That's the number one purpose of the world, is for us to be able to deposit our sin, to see our guilt outside of us. And we need the world so we can hide from God. As we're afraid of our mind, right? We are afraid of our mind because we think God is there and he will get us if we return to our mind. We use the world to keep us in a state of constant mindlessness. Mindlessness is our natural, quote unquote, state of being right now in this world. So if the world, though, would be all darkness, we would question the ego so much sooner, right? Because if it would be just a wasteland, we would question it much sooner. But because it has beautiful aspects to it, right? It has sunsets and mountain ranges and sandy beaches, we're less inclined to look closer. And we can live with opposites, but we cannot live with what the Course says, mentions or states, a oneness joined as one. We as ego identified beings, the decision maker joined with the ego, cannot grasp or even want to go near the concept of a oneness joined as one, with no shades or grades or any contrast at all. We simply cannot fathom this, right? That's how brilliant the ego is. We were completely forgotten what is above this line. Heaven, our natural state, is the most unnatural state for us right now in this moment. And Jesus, he asks many, many questions in the Course. One of them is the following. He says, looking at the world, he says, do you like what you have made? A world of murder and attack, through which you thread your timid way, through constant dangers, alone and frightened, hoping at most that death will wait a little longer before it overtakes you and you disappear. Do you like what you have made, this world that we look at? It's a good question, but it's also a very frightening question to the ego. It's a question that actually the ego never wants us to go anywhere near. The main purpose of the ego is for us to never ask this question. Do you like what you have made? And look at the world. Really look at the world. What is it? What is it made of? What does it give us? What is the purpose of the world? Really look at it. To ask the question, do you like what you have made, is the beginning of the end for the ego. Because the ego would never let us ask that question. The question is a necessary step on our journey to liberation. It's a very hard question to really ask ourselves, do you like what you have made? Do you like this world? Really look at it. Look at what the purpose is, and do you really like it? And the honest answer of right now if we're in our ego, which we are most of the time, is yes, we like it. You know, we don't always like it, but there's no other world for us that we know of, so this is it, right? It's the only one we have. We might as well like it or learn to like it, adjust to it. And then there's always things like the Discovery Channel, right? That gives us stunning images of beautiful nature scenes that seem to be quite the opposite of what Jesus describes in his Course. But that's only if we don't look closely, right? If we start to look closely, we get a completely different picture. And over time, over the journey with the Course, you know, decades of studying it and applying it, we learn to see the world in a different way. It's not an easy process, because before we can see the real world, that's of course a term the Course mentions, we have to first question the world. And questioning the world is very hard for us to do because we are so identified with it. Our individual existence depends on the world. And questioning the world means questioning us, which we're not ready to do, right? So, however, the good news is, if we are a student of the Course, which we all are, that must mean that we are at least somewhat ready, even if it's only in the slightest, to go just one step further and look a little bit more closely at the world. You know, there's the saying, beauty is skin deep. If you would strip the first 2 inches of the whole world, of everything, of trees, of the surface of the world, you would strip the first 2 inches, the world would be completely different, because the beauty of the world is just the top layer, right? It's a very thin layer of sugar coating over something that is not beautiful at all. So here's this sentence in the Course that I think is one of those top 10 important sentences in the Course. It's something you can just think about forever. The sentence is, projection makes perception, and you cannot see beyond it. You cannot see beyond perception, which means projections. We cannot see beyond our projections, which means literally everything we look at, we can only see our projections, right? There's nothing that is beyond our projections. The whole world is basically covered in a veil of darkness that we put there. The Course says in workbook lesson number 22, what I see is a form of vengeance, right? We see and feel and live literally in the upside down, as the TV series describes. The upside down in Stranger Things is where we live right now. Every creature here waits for death. That is our world. Death is the final outcome of everything in the world. Some of it is slower, some of it takes longer, but death is what we're all going toward. We're not going towards anything positive in this world. We're going all towards death. And then we create concepts, yeah, okay, after death, there's something there that's better and all this stuff. But again, the ego wants us to be either in the past or in the future, to forget the present moment, where the actual healing can happen and the actual real world can rise within our mind. So what we have projected onto the world, what we see, is our belief that we have murdered God and destroyed our home. Nothing beautiful can come of it. You know, nothing beautiful can be found in it. If you think about it this way, we have completely split off the Holy Spirit from our mind most of the time, 99% of the time. If we are in our ego, we cannot but see this veil, the veil of guilt that we project onto the world. And because we're never not projecting, if we're in our ego, the world we see is a world of darkness. There is no other, there's nothing else there, right? And the Course says, can you paint rosy lips upon a skeleton, dress it in loveliness, pet it and pamper it, and make it live? That's in the chapter 23, section 2. So we cannot see any meaning in this world, because if we're seeing with the ego, the world is meaningless, right? And the workbook says a meaningless world engenders fear. We see through the ego and we see a meaningless world. And then we project meaning into it. You know, we get meaning from certain areas in the world, or certain plants, or rock formations, or beaches, or ocean, and stuff like that. That's our attempt to make this world of sin and guilt appear a little bit more habitable, and make the upside down world from Stranger Things. We put a couple of flowers in there so that we're not so, it would be so devastating if we would actually look at the world as it really is. That's why there are some beautiful quote unquote aspects to it. And Jesus says, guilt makes you blind, for while you see one spot of guilt within you, you will not see the light. You will not see the light. And by projecting it, the world seems dark and shrouded in your guilt. You throw a dark veil over it and cannot see it because you cannot look within. So we can't see the world. We cannot see the real world, as the Course says, because everything we see has this veil over it. And I think what happens in our process with the Course, in our journey with the Course, is that over time we start realizing that whatever we see, because there is no love, you know, yes, you can see a sunset and you can feel something, but if you're in a crowded subway, or if you're in a war zone, right, or in an ugly street, you don't see beauty. Yes, you can see it, but in general, right? In general, we see ugliness and we see beauty. And we think this contrast is real, but those are the same. Ugliness and beauty in this world are the same. And that's the brilliance of the ego. The ego tells us, look, those are differences, right? You have ugliness, but you also have beauty. It's real, right? It's a brilliant plan by the ego to keep us in this world and never question it. So as long as we believe we're guilty, we cannot see any light in the world. We can see artificial light. The sun is artificial light, right? We see, oh, this is a beautiful day, and we're slightly less miserable than we are when it's raining, right? We are in the upside down, but we don't know it. We don't believe it. And therefore, there's no way out for us. Unless we start questioning what we see, there is no way out. Oh, the only thing we can do is search for beauty and good things in this world, right? Jesus wants us to have a completely different experience, way different from our experience now, where we see a beautiful sunset and then we go back home into a 30-story apartment building and we're depressed, right? He wants us to see the beauty that comes from here, from inside us, everywhere, all the time, right? And we'll get to that. So this doesn't really mean we can't enjoy a beautiful sunset or a hike in the mountains. So who wouldn't, right? But In our process as students with the Course, there must come a time when we question it. It doesn't have to be a long period of time. And it's usually not a happy time when we question this world and realize, whoa, the world is made as an attack on God. Right? We see the sugar coating is kind of cracking and breaking off. So there is a time in the Course student's life where we question the world. And that's an absolutely necessary step on this journey. So here's why the world doesn't seem all bad. The ego's goal for us is to stay with it, to choose it, right? To vote for it constantly, always, 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 always. The ego cannot exist without our belief in it. So it must try to uphold this belief in us all the time, right? It kind of got us because part of us wants to be separate. It also got us because we believe the ego when it tells us that we're sinful and guilty. It gives us a world where we can deposit our guilt, we can be free from our guilt. That's the ego's plan. Where we can find a substitute for heaven, at least in part, and where we can hide from God, from God's wrath. But it only can ever give us the opposite of heaven. It can never give us the real thing. And because this memory of God is still within us, in this split part of the mind of the Son of God, we never not have this yearning for God. Even in our separated state, it's always there, and the ego always have to counteract it. And that's why it gives us a week vacation in the Bahamas, right? We can lie on a beach for a week, or we can get a massage, or we can walk by a creek, or watch a sunset, or fireworks, or something like that. It constantly has to give us something that we lie to ourselves and say this makes us happy, right? It doesn't. And we found this Course because part of us realizes that we're not happy. Otherwise we wouldn't have found the Course, right? Some of us, part of us already knows, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. What I'm looking for, what I have been looking for all my life in this world, I cannot find, right? And that is the crucial moment where we realize there must be a better way. And questioning the world is part of that better way. All right, I covered this. So it's from Jesus's perspective, he has to, as our teacher, really the only thing he can do is motivate us to seek him out. And maybe not so much him personally, but seek out his way of seeing, just because it makes us happier. That's really the only reason. It's a very selfish reason in the beginning to learn this Course, because we're so desperate. We're in such pain, and the world isn't giving us nothing but pain that looks like it's not pain. And we're in such misery, we don't know that we're in misery. We think we're happy, right? So Jesus he brings us near a different way of seeing. And one of those quotes is in The Gifts of God by Helen Schucman, that she wrote down after the Course was dictated. And this paragraph is part of the prose poem that is called The Gifts of God. It's a book that the Foundation for A Course in Miracles published. It has poems of Helen's in it, and it has this prose poem that was actually Jesus dictating to her. And it says here, and if you can imagine it, Jesus sitting there next to us, reading it to us, right? He says, "This is my offering. A quiet world, with gentle ordering and kindly thought, alive with hope and radiant in joy, without the smallest bitterness of fear upon its loveliness. Accept this now, for I have waited long to give this gift to you. I offer it in place of fear and all the gifts that fear has given you. Can you choose otherwise when all the world is standing breathless, waiting on your choice?" So if we look at the world that we see, and then we overlay what Jesus is offering us, a quiet world, not a loud world, with gentle ordering and kindly thought, alive with hope and radiant in joy. When do we ever look at the world and we are radiant in joy? And we see a world radiant in joy? If we're very honest, we have to say never. Once in a while we see something, maybe we see something on the internet and we're like, oh, this is great. It's like a flash mob in a mall and beautiful music and stuff like that. But look how small those moments are, right? Those are crumbs under a table that we're trying to pick and eat from, where above us is the whole banquet. Jesus wants to give us the banquet. He wants us to look out at a world radiant with joy. And in order for that to happen, we have to question this world. We don't have to generate this other world that Jesus is talking about. That's already there. The moment we look through this Holy Spirit's view, that's the world we will see. It's there, it's ready. It's completely ready. It's just like you're putting down this projector and you put the extender, which the Course says this is extends and this one projects. So we put this on and we see through this lens and we see a world radiant in joy. And we might be on a packed subway, or we might be in a doctor's office or in a grocery store. It doesn't matter. We might be in a war zone, or we might be on a dirty city street somewhere with piles of garbage everywhere, right? We would still see this world radiant in joy, because that's the world the Holy Spirit has in store for us. That's the world we see if we look through His vision, right? His vision looks on everything the same way. And the difference between the two worlds is staggering. There's absolutely no point where those two worlds meet. They are completely separate from each other. They generate a completely different experience within us. This one we know, because that's the one we see every day. This one we have completely forgotten. And the moment we allow ourselves to go there and look out through this lens, we are reminded of how beautiful not the world is, but how beautiful our home is, that we remember, and with this we look out onto the world and we cannot see but a reflection of heaven. And Jesus talks about that, right? He talks about that each bird will sing its song just for us. That's how it will feel. But it's not something our eyes see really, but it's something that we experience when we look out through this lens. And all we need to do in order to get there, not all we need to do, there's nothing we can dismiss about that, because it's a very long and hard process. But the one thing we need to do is question the world we see and ask Jesus, this can't be the real world where everything waits for death. This cannot be all there is, right? And Jesus says in the Course, you do not ask too much of life, but far too little. That's in the workbook, lesson 133. We ask far too little from life. Even if we ask to have all the treasures in the world, we're asking for far too little, because whatever we look at with the ego is absolutely meaningless. And the longer we study the Course, the more we realize how meaningless it is, right? But we have also not really grabbed onto the Holy Spirit yet. So we're, for a while, and this could be a long while, we're in this in-between state where I always say, I can't be without Jesus anymore, but I can't also be with him still. Right? We're in this in between. We know the world is not really giving us what we want, but we're not totally set on this part either. We don't trust Jesus, that he will actually bring us to this world and show it to us. And we're asked to kind of question this without having established that this is real. So it is not an easy process at all, right? At all. And the one thing I can say from my own experience is that the only thing really that bridges the gap a little bit is to start as early as we can to have a personal relationship with the ego, we always have that, with Jesus or with the Holy Spirit, whichever one works. Because that's going to be the key later on in the process, when we look at darker spots and layers in the ego. We need this presence within us to look at. Otherwise, it's scary. It's scary anyway, but it would be scarier. We wouldn't even be able to look at all the darkness in our ego if it wouldn't be with Jesus or the Holy Spirit. So all I can say is, the more we work with the Course, the more important it is to have this personal as possible. We tell him everything we can. We invite him to everything. We basically want to share our lives with him or the Holy Spirit, because that is what will lead us out. That's just an aside. We're going to do a separate segment on that. So we have now established that we are in the upside down right now, right? We're thinking we're right side up, but we're actually upside down. And as the world is only the effect of what we think, if we think with this side or with this side, it makes sense to briefly discuss our personal interior upside down world that we're in, right? And Jesus mentions that throughout the Course. He drops lines constantly that remind us that whatever we think or any emotions that we have is upside down. So, for example, Jesus says that not only is the world we see literally upside down, our emotions and our thoughts are upside down as well. What we believe is love, right? Special love relationship is actually hate, with a thin layer of love on top. So whatever we think is love is hate. What we think we like in the world, we actually despise, because it really does not satisfy us. It does not satisfy us. And Jesus says that many times, that the world does not make you happy, right? The ego is trying over and over again, and we're content up to a certain point. But the moment we question that this is not making us happy, the veil we look at when we look out onto the world starts to crack. and we realize this is not where the meaning lies. The meaning has to lie someplace else. It can't be in the world. What we think about others, their motives, for example, right? Other people's motives and how we see them is not them at all. It's completely reversed. Whatever we think the motives of somebody else are our motives. So we're flipping it, right? What we think is outside is actually inside. What we think is up is down. What we think is good is bad. What we think is love is hatred. And what we think is happiness is not happiness, it's fear. We learned that in a previous segment. And finally, what we think we're afraid of is not at all what we're afraid of, right? We think we're afraid of stock market crashing, a disease, spiders, heights, other people. We're not afraid of any of those things. We're afraid of the love of God, right? So the outside world is pretty straightforward. That it's the upside down, right? If we start thinking about it, but our own emotions are the opposite of what actually is happening. And that's a little mind-boggling. That takes some time to wrap our head around that, to realize that what we think is love is hate. What we think is happiness is only fear, and what we think we're afraid of is not what we're afraid of. We're afraid of love. Flips it again. So the Course says your manifestations of emotions are the opposite of what the emotions are. You communicate with no one, and you are as isolated from reality as if you were alone in all the universe. We read those lines and we just read past it, and we read until we come to a nice line, right? Because this is devastating. This is a devastating line. You communicate with no one, and you are as isolated from reality as if you were alone in all the universe. If you think about that, right? Allow us to start grasping this for one moment. We are alone in all the universe, even though we live with someone, we see friends, right? This is all the ego telling us, look, you can find comfort here, you can find friendship and love in this world. And we don't have to not do that anymore, but we, at the very least, ask Jesus or the Holy Spirit, can this be right? Can this be all there is? Or is there more? Right? That's the beginning of the reversal. And basically all that Jesus asks is to perhaps begin to think about the possibility that Jesus's view of ourselves and the world makes us ever so slightly happier than our own. That's really all he's asking. He's only asking us to open our mind a tiny little bit and look at the world a tiny little differently, and then we close it again. 2 weeks later, oh, wait a minute, we open it again and we question another aspect of the world. 5 years later, we go back and we question another aspect. And over time, we realize, whoa, this can't be as real as I thought it was, because it's so fragmented and changing all the time. There must be something more permanent, right? And that whatever is more permanent is already inside us. We have to access it, and we have to want to access it. In order for us to want to access it, we have to realize, or we have to not want this so much anymore. That's why the Course goes through such lengths to explain the ego thought system. I mean, there's no other spirituality that dives so deep into special relationships of what we do with each other, how we are with each other, what we think about the world and ourselves, right? That's all that is there to start very slowly to question what we think and what we do and what we see. So we can open our mind a slight bit and get a little whiff of that green grass of home, right? Of that melody that we forgot. Tiny little bit, and then we close it again. We go back to this one. We do our work with the Course, and once in a while, we have a little bit of a respite moment when we go back to the Holy Spirit. So the end result of questioning our world that we see right now is the real world. The real world is a term in the Course, and that real world will be the topic in our next chapter. It makes sense to do that right after this one, because the correction for the ego always comes after the ego, after the Course discusses the ego. So in this chapter, unfortunately, it was pretty dark. We talked a lot about the darkness and how what the world really is. And in the next chapter, we're going to talk about the real world, what that is, and what Jesus has in store for us if we change our mind. And as a closing, I want to read chapter 26, section 4. It says here, "Forgiveness turns the world of sin into a world of glory, wonderful to see. Each flower shines in light, and every bird sings of the joy of heaven. There's no sadness, and there's no parting here, for everything is totally forgiven. And what has been forgiven must join, for nothing stands between to keep them separate and apart. The sinless must perceive that they are one, for nothing stands between to push the other off. And in the space that sin left vacant, do they join as one, in gladness recognizing what is part of them has not been kept apart and separate." See you next time.